Welcome to The Free Will Show, a podcast that provides a beginner-friendly introduction to free will while also exploring cutting-edge developments on the topic. I'm Taylor Sear.
And I'm Matt Flummer. In this episode, we talk with Marcela Herdova about moral luck and transformative experiences, the kind of experiences that fundamentally change who we are.
Thanks for listening. Well, I'm happy to introduce Marcela Herdova, who's Assistant Professor of Philosophy at Florida State University. Marcela's research centers around moral responsibility, and she has published papers on many topics that we've discussed on this podcast, including manipulation arguments against compatibilism, the Libet experiment, situationism, and moral luck. Today, we'll ask her some questions about a recent paper on what she calls transformative moral luck. Welcome to the show, Marcela. Can you start by telling us a bit about yourself, your work, and how you came to be interested in working on issues related to free will?
So, hi, Taylor. Hi, Matt. Thank you for having me here. I'm really honored, and I do love the show. So, thank you for having me here.
Yeah, thanks.
So, as far as I got to philosophy in general, it was a kind of a roundabout route. When I was a teenager, I read this book called Sophie's World by Jocelyn Gardner, which is like a mystery novel philosophy type of book. And I thought, okay, this sounds like fun. So they raise all these big questions about the world. So I thought, I'm just going to study philosophy for 5 years just for fun of it. And I will work out everything that they ask, and then I'll just find a different job. Well, that kind of didn't happen. I did go into this just thinking I will study this for a few years because I am really into it. And I was planning on doing completely different things. I was working as a journalist at the time, and I have always been involved in public policy and politics. So that's where I thought I was kind of heading. But then I got really into the academic aspect and the research of it. So I decided to stick with it. And I have started with being interested in philosophy of mind. So a lot of my time, so prior to FSU, I was in London. I was working on the issues of philosophy of mind, nature of mind, mental causation, consciousness, and self-consciousness. And that gradually transitioned more aligning with my interests outside philosophy into thinking about human behavior and why we do certain things we do, and on the basis of that, how we should evaluate people based on what they do. And this is where the interest in free will came in. So for me, the main thing has always been centered around how we should appraise people when they do something good, when they do something bad. And with that, naturally came an interest in, well, can people control what they do, or what the factors are that sort of take away control from us? So while I'm myself very much, and I have written specifically on the sort of the very abstract problems in free will, one of my main concerns about free will is in so far as it can tell us precisely how we should treat other people. And in this, I think that the free will debate and the moral responsibility debate are both fascinating for me for the same kind of reason, that there is this huge tension between sort of what our experiences are and what our practices are, and then what certain evidence tells us. So when I teach free will course at FSU, I kind of try to formulate this to my students as like the tension between the two Strawsons. So we have Peter Strawson, who will tell us that there are these reactive attitudes, these practices that are core to us as humans, to being able to relate to one another, and we shouldn't give them up because they are part of who we are and a crucial thing how we relate to one another. But at the same time, you go to Galen Strawson and you see all these arguments as to, well, we in fact don't control ourselves in the way we think we might do. So all of these practices that might depend on control might not be warranted. So it's this tension that I find utterly fascinating. And this is what most of my research is on.
Very cool.
It's a nice way to put it. I like it.
Yeah. Well, in your recent paper, Transformative Moral Luck, you draw from Laurie Paul's seminal work on transformative experiences, arguing that there's an interesting variety of moral luck connected with transformative experiences. Could you say what you mean by transformative experiences? I guess first we can talk about that and give an example or two.
Thank you, Matt. Absolutely. So, in how I deal or understand transformative experiences, I essentially follow what Laurie Paul says about these. So I defer to the expert. And so my notion of what I work with is basically taken straightforwardly from Laurie Paul. And the way she understands transformative experiences is basically the kind of experience that radically changes you. And so it's the kind of experience that is radically new to you in the sense that you gain certain values and knowledge that you haven't had before, but also changes your core values too. So essentially, she thinks that there are two components to something being a transformative experience, and both of these components are essential. So one component is epistemic, and that's when you through this experience you learn something new that you couldn't have learned without having that kind of experience. And there is also the personal element where you undergo a transformation that is where you change as a person quite radically, so your core personal preferences shift after you have had that experience. Now, some of the examples that Laurie Paul gives, and I think they're really good examples, would be things like becoming a new parent or emigrating to a new country or fighting a war. So the one experience that I talk in this particular paper we are discussing is about immigrating to a new country, which I was partly writing based on my personal experience. I have done this several times in my life. So the one thing to note about the transformative experiences is that not all experiences that, let's say, Laurie Paul mentions will be transformative for everyone. So it will partly depend on what your background is and what your values already are. And also, not all such transformative experiences will be chosen as well. So my interest right now is in choosing to have certain transformative experiences, but they are not necessarily like that, all of them. So things like becoming ill, for example, that might be a transformative experience of sorts, at least for some people. Same on sort of more of a flip side, falling in love, that too, assuming that this is not something that we choose to do, is also or can be for some people transformative experience. So on the example that I use throughout the paper that we are talking about moving abroad, as I did when I was a teenager, it was an epistemically transformative experience because I have through that choice to move away, I have learned certain things that I would not have known otherwise. One of the most basic things is learning what it's like for me to completely change where I live and my environment in my culture. And then, based on that experience, based on how I value that experience, also gain reasons for or against doing that in the future. So it's both that in this transformative experience, I learn what it's like, and I based on that I gain some other new values, but I also gain reasons against or for making a similar kind of choice in the future, reasons that would not have been accessible to me prior to making that choice to move as a teenager.
Mhm.
Now, as for the personal component of this, with the example such as that you move abroad, some things that I discuss in a paper is that it might sort of change your character in some fundamental ways. one of the really obvious ones, you sort of change from being a shy person into someone who is maybe by necessity becomes much more extroverted and so on. And and based on that, you sort of change how you interact with other people and so on. So again, given these two components, the epistemic and personal, this is a good example of why moving abroad really at any age can be a transformative experience.
Yeah.
Nice.
Cool.
Thanks. We want to ask you about transformative experiences and moral luck, but I thought it might be nice to do a quick review of what moral luck is. So, for listeners who are interested in an introduction, they can check out our interview with Dan and Elkin in season 1 of the podcast on the topic of moral luck. But Marcela, could you briefly describe what makes something a case of moral luck?
Okay, absolutely. So moral luck is that kind of luck that rightfully makes a difference to how you should be morally assessed. So I will evoke to best to illustrate this on this example that's very often used in the literature. It was what's usually called a case of resultant moral luck when you have two drivers who decide to drink and drive. And so the way to sort of spell out this idea of moral luck is that you have these two people who make exactly the same bad choice, I should emphasize, drink and drive, but how their actions turn out is essentially going to be very different. So the first drink driver will, due to luck, will arrive home happy and safe without running into any kind of trouble. Now, the second drink driver will be less lucky in that regard, in the sense that that will be a pedestrian that walks in front of them and they will hit and kill this person drinking and driving. So we have people who make exactly the same choice, who take exactly the same risks, but one is more lucky than the other. I mean, obviously, the pedestrian is not lucky himself or herself, but we are putting that aside for now. Now, we are going to treat these drivers very differently, and whether it comes to the legal aspect of this or the moral aspect of this. So when it comes to legal aspect of this, even if the drink driver who didn't hit anyone um, is then found out later somehow, it's going to turn out that he'd been drinking and driving. If there is going to be any legal recourse against this person, it's not going to be of the same kind as with a drink driver who had actually killed a person. So that person will be treated legally very differently. Whatever punishment they have will be much worse. Similarly, when it comes to our reactive attitudes, sort of how we might feel and how we might judge these individual drivers will be different. So, arguably, the one that actually kills a person will warrant more indignation, anger, resentment, all these negative attitudes. However, given that their intentions, their risk taking, everything that they had under their control was the same. The only thing that makes a difference to their assessment is this element of luck, whether there was or wasn't someone who was walking in front of their car right at the wrong time. And so it's this kind of luck that then will make a difference, and a rightful difference, as to how these two drivers should be assessed. So the one that actually kills a person should be assessed more harshly.
Yeah. Could you explain your argument for the conclusion that whether certain transformative choices are justified or unjustified is a matter of luck?
Absolutely. So my concern is twofold. One is about the choices, and one is about what happens, what results from those choices. But so when it comes to discussing the choices that lead to transformative experiences, my main concern here is going to be that the relevant justification is only retrospective. That in the absence of certain objective or conclusive reasons prior to making that choice, whether that choice to undergo experience that's going to turn out to be transformative is justified or not is going to be settled only after that choice had been made and after that transformative experience had taken place. So, to unpack that a little bit more, so when it comes to transformative choices, let's say, to become a parent or move abroad, some of these choices will be justified or unjustified by one of the two things. Sometimes they will collapse together, sometimes not. One, by how you value or disvalue the choice that you have made, and by how this choice, how the transformative experience, whether it has been successful or not. So let's say, with my example of moving abroad, whether that choice is going to be justified or not will be in part dependent, now again, barring that there are any objective reasons for me not to do it in the first place. It's otherwise it's going to be dependent on how I value that experience, how I value that choice. So, am I enjoying living abroad? Am I enjoying being immersed in this new, different culture? And it also will be justified or unjustified in part how my experience abroad is going. So, am I finding success abroad in all the sort of possible understanding of success? Have I built a good support network of friends? Have I found a job that's able to sustain me, and so on? Now, when it comes to both of these aspects of transformative choices and what justifies them or can justify them, these things, neither of these will be settled only after I have made that choice. So it's probably going to be the more apparent with considering whether the transformative experience has been appropriately successful or unsuccessful. So we can't know that until that actually happens. So, similarly, whether I'm going to value this choice and this experience, that's also going to be settled only after I have already made that choice. And the reason for that is that we have to remember that if we believe in transformative experiences, it's going to be personally transformative for you. So once you have undergone the experience, you will gain radically new set of values. So you you can predict with your all, you can have a guess with your old you before you make that choice whether you might enjoy the experience or not, whether it's going to be valuable for you, but you can't settle that question beforehand, because precisely it's only after the choice had been made, you actually gain the relevant set of values that will enable you to evaluate the experience from an appropriate point of view. So, given that, then we can conclude that these transformative choices that we are talking about can only be justified or unjustified only retrospectively. So they are justified or unjustified by those kind of things that obtain after the choice has already been made. But that also means that before you make that choice or at the time of the choice, you cannot foresee if your choice is going to be justified or not. And so that means at the time of at the time when you're choosing, when you're thinking about what to do, it's sort of beyond your control how things are going to turn out. And this is where the luck aspect comes in. If a choice is justified or unjustified only retrospectively, and whether it's justified or not is unforeseeable when you are making a choice, then because, this is beyond your control, it is a matter of luck whether that choice you are making right there and then is actually justified or not.
Hmm. Nice. And in your paper, you extend this argument to conclusions about luck and whether a person is praiseworthy or blameworthy for a transformative choice, and also to luck concerning the results of transformative choices, such as like what free actions a person goes on to perform as a result of their transformation. Could you explain why you think a person's praiseworthiness or blameworthiness may be affected by transformative luck?
Right. Thank you. Absolutely. So, when it comes to the first question, how this sort of trickles into the discussion about praiseworthiness and blameworthiness. So, I take it that, praiseworthiness will track uh, actions which are free and justified.
Hmm.
Same with blameworthiness is going to track actions which are free and unjustified. And so, given that these actions that, these choices that we make uh, seem to be by many different accounts free, they have different hallmarks of agency,
Hmm.
but they are still a matter of luck. This will sort of translate into the praiseworthiness or blameworthiness because it is a matter of luck how things are going to turn out, whether that action, whether that choice is justified or not, it is also going to be a matter of luck, assuming that these are free actions, whether the agent is praiseworthy or blameworthy for making that kind of choice.
Hmm.
Now, as to your other part of your question, if we can extend this even further. So, the argument that I have talked about was about making transformative choices. But there is also a concern with regards to luck about the results of these choices. And by which I mean is your actions that then stem from these new values that you have. And here the idea is also kind of really simple, and is that it's a matter of luck with what kind of values you end up as a result of having undergone a transformative choice. And so, again, because you might make a move abroad and it just might change you in some unforeseen ways. And given that everything that's to do with transformative experience, that you can't settle this beforehand, it's going to be a matter of like what values you end up having. But then after this transformative experience, again by the different criteria, agents often act freely on these new values. They freely express these new values in their actions. So people act on these values intentionally, voluntarily. Uh, we could say that these actions do in fact express their deep new self and so on. But given that the values that you gain are sort of a matter of luck, so are the actions that sort of stem from these values. So the actions of the agents post the transformative experience, they inherit the luck from the fact that the new values are to a matter of luck, and it's not something that the agent controls in an appropriate kind of way.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, so for moral luck connoisseurs, some of these varieties of moral luck may sound familiar. Do you think there are instances of any types of moral luck that philosophers have distinguished? And do you think some transformative moral luck is importantly different from these other types of moral luck?
Right. Thank you. So I do think that, and maybe you can help answer this question because I'm not sure. So the one thing I talk about in this paper, that when it comes to the moral luck as concerning the choices, um, it's in part, it seems to be very closely related to result and luck,
Hmm.
because it's sort of how the experience turns out. Whether we value or disvalue the experience, and how we end up being. I guess the one difference from, and this is why I think it also might be a bit more disturbing or concerning, when you are talking about the kind of typical cases of result and luck, like the two drink drivers, the sort of the luck that we're talking about, the pedestrian crossing the road, that's something external to the agent. The stuff that we're talking about here is something that's sort of part of you. So you make this deliberate choice, you are weighing what to do, and still how things are going to turn out to be,
Hmm.
is not under your control in
Hmm.
the right kind of way. So it bears some hallmarks of result and luck, but it's also different from that. So I will leave it up to you to
Yeah.
decide if you think it's the same kind or not.
Yeah.
And the same with the luck concerning the actions that follow on from that. Here, to me, it's most reminiscent of constitutive luck.
Hmm.
So it's, again, for people who are listening, is a luck, that sort of is a luck in how you are,
Hmm.
basically. And typically, when we're talking about constitutive luck, we are talking about cases where we discuss that you are determined in part by, let's say, genetics or how you have been brought up, again, so by these external factors to you, things beyond your control. Again, in this kind of case, this is a sort of a very strange case when it comes to transformative experiences, because here you are trying to make yourself in a certain way. So you have your own input into your constitution, but yet again, the kind of values you end up with, and then the resulting actions are not appropriately controlled either, because again of all these issues that we have talked about before, that it's a matter of luck with what values you end up with, and whether the choice had been justified in the first place or not. So again, I
Hmm.
think it's similar to constitutive luck, at least, but also different in the sense that it's it's something that is a result of deliberative choice, and yet it's still kind of the right kind of control eludes us still.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It's almost backwards from a normal case where we affect our constitutions. Like through intentional choice, we can shape our characters, and then it seems like it's not constitutive luck that we have the character. But this is sort of the backwards case where it's, yeah, we're indirectly shaping our characters in ways that we can't foresee and don't have control over.
Yeah.
That's exactly how I see it. In fact, I actually have a second paper on this issue, that's called "Barking Up the Wrong Tree," and that
Nice.
that precisely deals with this issue. That it's a kind of a thing that we believe that we can do, sort of majorly shape our characters. That we can turn ourselves, like, let's say, from bad to good.
Hmm.
Basically the premise of every villain turn hero movie ever. uh, but I am sort of arguing there for a similar thing that you just said, Taylor, that it's not clear based on what transformative experiences are, assuming there are such experiences, that if we are going to undergo a major transformation, that this kind of transformation had been fully justified and rationally chosen,
Hmm.
precisely because of nature of transformative experiences.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, you mentioned earlier that the upshot of this work might be a bit disturbing. So you've said that there are cases of transformative moral luck. Um, so luck can influence a person's degree of praiseworthiness or blameworthiness. What do you think we should make of all this? Do you find that surprising? How disturbing do you find it? And do you think it should make a difference to how we praise and blame each other?
Okay, thank you. That's a good question, and I'm just now wondering if I should publicly let out how much of a skeptic I really am when it comes to certain things, because in my writing, I maybe try to tone down my skeptical side.
Oh, okay.
So, um, so what I'm arguing for, that this moral luck does exist. So meaning that uh, the fact that this luck is present in transformative choices at like various levels does not exempt you from responsibility and from being praised or blamed. But I do think it's a mitigating factor at least. So, so just to sort of give an example, when we're talking about the transformative choices, again, it's sort of best if we, understand it by comparing two different agents.
Mhm.
So, if you are making a choice about something that's going to become a transformative experience, you are ignorant prior to that choice. Whether your choice and the experience that follows from that ends up being justified or not justified. You just simply cannot know because you don't have access to the right kinds of reasons, and therefore you just don't know how things are going to be turning out. Now, if you compare it with someone who is not ignorant in that kind of way, and understands the justification for or against, understands what the potential result of one's choice might be, so sort of goes in it with his eyes open. When you compare these kinds of agents, the first one, the one that does the transformative choice, is much more ignorant and seems to lack various things we want there to be for someone to be fully morally responsible for something.
Mhm.
So they would not be exempt because, again, there are various hallmarks of uh, these choices being performed freely, for example, but there is a significant element that detracts from this person having enough control. And we might make basically the same kind of argument about responsibility for agents and for their actions that result from these transformative choices. So again, we can compare two pairs of agents, one that acts on new values that they gained through this transformative experience. But the values that they end up with are sort of a matter of luck, and then someone acting on basis of some carefully crafted values that they have intentionally gained through some rational and well informed deliberative process. So again, the first agent in comparison to the other one, it seems to be lacking something that to me warrants diminishing their responsibility to a degree, but does not completely exempt them. So when you're making a transformative choice compared to a more ideal agent or a completely ideal agent, you seem to be lacking things that warrant at least, tempering certain attitudes, bad or good.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right, I've got a question. I'm not sure if it's going to make sense, but I'm going to try to frame this. So I'm thinking about this in relation to like a manipulation kind of argument where it seems like manipulation is going after the control condition or it's aligning itself with removing control through the manipulation. And I wonder if your argument seems to go on the more knowledge side of the requirement for moral responsibility. So, if there's this like parallel between manipulation argument and a transformative moral luck kind of argument where You have no idea what's going to happen at the end result of this transformative experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this, I don't know how to explain what I'm thinking. Does this make sense? Like going in this direction,
Absolutely.
um,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
where it's like a diminishing your responsibility in the same way that you have no control over what happens in the manipulation scenario. And so that diminishes your responsibility.
Thank you, Matt. That is pretty much how I'm thinking about it. So I think you have summarized it really well. So, it's about the fact that when you make these choices, you simply cannot know if, I mean, again, if these choices genuinely exist. And there is some debate about that. So some people will be skeptical whether one can have indeed a transformative experience of the kind that Laurie Paul talks about.
Mm-hmm.
But if we put that aside, if you are making a choice, a transformative choice, it's just part of the definition, part of the understanding of what transformative experiences are, that you simply cannot know
Mm-hmm.
how things are going to turn out and what kind of person you are going to turn into and what values you will gain as a result. And because of that, you lack access to good reasons for or against making that kind of choice. And so I guess different theories will run with it differently as to sort of how
Mm-hmm.
to spell out this lack of access to reasons, whether it's sort of whether we are going to understand it as a sort of like a separate knowledge condition on responsibility, or whether we sort of bulk it together under control. But that is indeed my main worry because of the nature of the experience. You don't know how it's going to turn out. You don't know what kind of person you are going to become and what set of values you are going to get. You lack, before you make that choice, good reasons for and against making that choice. Again, now I'm talking about transformative experiences where there are no objective reasons against making that choice.
Mm-hmm.
So, we have been talking about moving abroad kind of example. So there might be a conclusive reason to move abroad in certain circumstances. Say that you have, I don't know, an ailing friend or parent who really, really depend on you for you to be there and, take care of them, and you have a duty to do so. So, I mean, that would count as a conclusive reason, for example, or,
Mm-hmm.
might on many ethical theories. Or you just know by having made short trips abroad that you actually haven't dealt with it very well. And even after a few days, you get extremely homesick and that you don't cope even with that short separation well, that might count as a very strong reason, at least, just not to move abroad. But if you don't have any of that, then with these transformative choices, you kind of sort of lack a guide about what choice you should be making, because it's only going to become apparent after the choice had been made, whether it was justified, and sort of all the reasons for and against it with your new value system are only sort of going to become apparent or even exist, depending again on your theory of reasons, not to complicate things after that choice had been made.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you think? What kind of differences do you think this should make to the way that we hold each other accountable, the way we praise and blame each other?
Well, so I think one thing that this shows is that, again, we might have, when it comes to some very common choices and some very common life experiences that we have and we choose to have, we have less control than what we might think. So I think this should definitely translate into how we treat people as well. So my general view, and again, this aligns with some of my skeptical tendencies, is that we should give praise where praise is due, regardless of these different considerations of did the person have control, not just because of luck, but for other considerations, because, giving praise is good also for pragmatic reasons and so on. But when it comes to blame specifically, I think this does suggest that we should temper our attitudes, at least negative attitudes, that we might have towards people who make a transformative choice that doesn't pan out well. Because I think part of what thinking about transformative experiences shows is that you really might have the best intentions, and you might try to make yourself a better person. You are trying to make the world a better place, but there are things that in this process that you cannot control, even though it's you making yourself in a certain way. And therefore, if things don't pan out the way they do, I think the sort of any negative reactions we might have towards this person should be at least somewhat tempered, recognizing that because of this radical break, you becoming a new person, this is not something you could have entirely controlled or have had a sort of a rational oversee of throughout this process.
Yeah.
Well, thanks. Thanks so much for joining us, Marcela. This has been a lot of fun. For listeners who are interested in reading more of your work, where can they go online to find you?
So online, if you go to my website, you can just find it by typing my name. It's got all my latest research and things that I do. So it's marcelaherdova.com. That's where you'll find my work.
Yeah, very cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, you guys. This was so much fun. Thank you for having me here.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thanks for coming on with us.
Thank you.
This concludes our 4th season of The Free Will Show. Our 5th season, which we'll release in the fall of 2022, will focus on divine foreknowledge and free will. And we'll also plan to release a special bonus episode in July, so stay tuned for that.